And we're back. Hey guys, today on the podcast, I am talking with Dr. Paul Zehr. Dr. Paul is, well, to me, he is a superhero scientist. Back in 2009, he wrote a book called Becoming Batman, and since then, he has written Inventing Iron Man and Chasing Captain America. Dr. Paul is a sensory neuroscientist who loves exploring human potential and what is in the realm of our possibilities. This is a fun conversation that I think you're going to enjoy. Thanks so much for listening. Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength Podcast. I guess, Dr. Paul, my first question would be, is it safe to call you the superhero scientist?
Sounds like a pretty grand title. I don't know if I'd want to take on that mantle without considering the implications. I guess in terms of science, I've been a person who's kind of explored a lot of different superheroes using science, but um, there's been lots of people I've sort of, looked to their efforts for as well for different areas. Like Jim Kikelios, who wrote an excellent book called The Physics of Superheroes. But I guess in terms of numbers of books, I'm definitely up there with numbers of science-based superhero books for sure. It's all good fun, right? So
Yeah, no. And I'm sure you don't know this, but I'm aware of this. You and I have something pretty huge in common. So a friend of mine named Mike, we were in 2009, we were discovering how wonderfully designed the body is. And we were learning all about how contralateral movement and using your limbs can like heal your brain and really tie your body together. And so we decided to write a book. And Mike is a huge Batman fan.
hmm.
And I'm a Superman fan. And so Mike really wanted to call the book Becoming Batman. So I went, for whatever reason, I went and looked on Amazon and I saw your book. I was like, oh, there's already a book called Becoming Batman, which is really neat. And so I won. So it was called, we wrote it and it was called Becoming Bulletproof.
Okay, the Superman link.
Yeah. But there, I mean, so much in common. Like that was your book. You beat us to it, Becoming Batman, and it was not dissimilar. Totally dissimilar from what we were finding. So I
Yeah,
just thought that was really, really neat.
yeah. Well, lots of stuff, lots of convergent points for sure in life, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, and I'm sorry because I know you have answered this so many times, but every good superhero has an origin story. So what is your origin story?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something you do think about, right? It's interesting when you think about the ideas of origins, because when we look back, it seems like a straight line, but of course, when we were experiencing it, it was not straight. Um, but I guess how I got to where I am now started when I was quite young, in the sense that a lot of what I wound up doing in my career, both as a scientist and as an author and a martial artist, which are kind of the main ways I see myself, in addition to being, a father and so on. I see myself in the world. Um, and it started with my mom, actually. My mom grew up back in what would be the golden age of what we would call the golden age of comics. So in the 30s and into the 40s. And she was really into comic books. Like she liked comics and she liked, when she would go to movies, they'd have the Superman and Batman serials, and she always wanted to go see the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, and she thought he was a superhero, and we sort of argued about that later, but that was her. The point of all that is that my mom sort of gave me or helped. I think I probably had some feelings around comic books and superheroes already, but she really helped flesh that out, because she would every week when she'd go grocery shopping, she'd buy me some comic books. I grew up in a super tiny little small town, so the grocery store and the bookstore were basically the same place. So there was like a spinner rack of comic books at the grocery store, and she would just grab some just at random, like it'd be whatever, might be Thor, Detective Comics, Superman, Flash, whatever she would grab. And it really instilled in me, it really got me into reading and being creative and thinking about science fiction, all kinds of stuff. And it sort of fed into an interest around martial arts, because I really did enjoy those stories where you had that kind of angle. Batman, Captain America had that. Iron Fist had that. Um, we also had, I think I mentioned Daredevil, maybe I did, but Daredevil, all these sort of martial artsy ones, which I really liked. And that sort of laid the groundwork for me eventually getting into martial arts. Where in this case, I was influenced additionally from the kind of comic book background that my mom provided. But also my brother got into martial arts. He was heavily influenced by Bruce Lee movies and all this kind of stuff and wanted to do Kung Fu, but we just had a karate group somewhere in our nearby town. So he started doing that. And then I sort of piggybacked onto that. And I was fascinated by, well, getting skill, the idea of, which is really just a way of saying acquiring knowledge, right? It is, but it's about the body usually and that kind of thing. But it's the same idea, learning stuff. And that got me all fired up about what's going on in my body, as I go through high school and I'm training more and got my first degree black belt and did all kinds of other things and was doing sports karate and whatever, really fascinated by it. And I wanted to study that in more detail and thought I wanted to study it in such a way I could learn something, maybe help other people. And so my sister was the first one in our family who went to university. So she was part of my origin story. And I went off to university. And originally I wanted to go do medicine, because she was the first physician in our family, first person to go to university and first physician. And but then I realized I wanted to do research, learn more about stuff. And my initial research projects were in martial arts, actually. And then from there, I wanted to do more in rehab, but kept an interest in martial arts. I've been training in martial arts since I was about 13. But once I got into being, doing all that kind of career track and getting into neuroscience after exercise science, because I wanted to know what was really driving all this stuff, I sort of got to a place where I wondered if there was a gap between what I set out to do and what I was doing. And what I mean by that is I was doing good stuff and, research projects and all kinds of things. And we were legitimately, helping people and developing therapies and all kinds of things. But I didn't feel that I was having the kind of impact or conveying information broadly enough to help people just all the time, and just regular folks who weren't university students in classes or who weren't, physiotherapists listening to me at some conference somewhere or something. And I felt bad about how people just don't understand science generally in our society. And so I thought maybe there's a way to combine all that stuff and to start doing some kind of science communication outreach stuff that focuses on combining, what were already my passions, right? The martial arts, science, and superheroes, and kind of rolling it into one thing. And that's sort of, what was basically the genesis for my first book, Becoming Batman, was that kind of line of thinking and sort of life to get me to that place. Yeah.
So basically, you started writing the books to be able to present to everybody, not just researchers or scientists or therapists, but just to get it out there to everybody that, hey, your body is amazing and this is what it can do.
Yeah. And I was really, something I had been thinking about in other aspects of my life is, I'd go to a lot of neuroscience conferences, and I went to a lot of exercise science conferences and kinesiology and biomechanics, because I had a lot of different sort of interests as a kind of, professor person. And one of the things I was struck by is that whenever you were in like a talk where somebody was trying to communicate something about research that might affect, people, maybe it's a new idea around nutrition or physical activity or being active, or whatever it was, or rehab even, the way people were talking about it was basically the way you would communicate something to yourself. In other words, somebody who already has your background and interest and passion, the way they're talking is very specialized, and it's like, oh, we're just talking about all this kind of stuff. But if you try to use that same way of talking or writing or whatever medium you're using to people who don't have the background you have or the passions that you have, it doesn't work very well, because it's kind of the idea of like preaching to the converted, right? They're all talking to all these people who all think the same way they do, and they're just talking about all these ideas, and everyone's like, yeah. But if you try to talk to people who don't have those backgrounds the same way, it's just a brick, like it's a blank slate. They can't understand what you're talking about. So I was really focused on, if I'm going to do some kind of science communication stuff, I've got to go the extra mile. And instead of thinking about, hey, how would I like to learn this stuff? Or, what do I already know? I just talk that way, was to kind of flip it around and imagine being in the audience and saying, I don't know about this. Tell me about it in a way that's interesting to me. Tell me about it in a way that it kind of combines the new stuff that you're going to tell me about, the science, with something I already know. And so that's where sort of superheroes become like a conduit, like, or a way to piggyback, to make a connection that you and I can talk about, Batman or Wonder Woman or whatever. And we have this image right away that pops into our heads. We both have the same image. We might think about superheroes in different ways, of course, but superheroes represent, archetypes that we understand, and we've got an idea who they are and what they can do. So we've got a common thing. Now I can talk about uncommon stuff. Do you understand what the brain does when Batman does all his training to learn how to, be a good fighter, or how to train things and what it does to his bones, or, all that kind of stuff. I think that's much easier to achieve if you've got something in common. And I just landed on superheroes because it was of interest to me, and I thought, what, this is, sounds crazy to say this nowadays because superheroes are everywhere, but back in the mid 2000s they weren't everywhere.
Right.
That was not a thing that was super common, and but I thought that it was going to be popular, and I thought that that was already a thing that could be of interest to people, was to kind of piggyback it like that, and in a way try to get science in a form that people would be learning about something, while they're already just having fun learning about something else. That friend of mine I mentioned, Jim Kikalios, who wrote The Physics of Superheroes, he calls that putting the spinach in with the ice cream. The idea that you're doing something and there's all kinds of benefits that are accruing, but you're not focused on that part. It just happens. And I think that's a great way just to learn anything, right? To have it have other context, have the other meaning, because not only can people sort of pick it up and take it on, but they remember it better because it's got more sticky bits, about things they've experienced. And yeah, that was sort of the reason for doing that, for sure.
That's pretty much the mark of a great teacher, right? To make learning fun, and where it has meaning with it, where you want to learn, where it's not an effort to learn, but it's just something you make people hungry to learn by doing things like that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's critical, right? Because it's as you're saying, when you do it like that and people get interested, any kind of learning, well, learning is an active process on both sides, right? The person who's trying to convey information, but especially the person who's receiving it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always used to say when I was teaching undergraduate courses, I'd be like, look, I can't teach you guys anything. Um, I'm going to share all kinds of information. I'm going to try to guide you through some topics, and we're going to explore all kinds of stuff, but I can't learn it for you. Like I can just present it and hopefully shape it in such a way that you are interested and you can engage with what we want to talk about. But the learning is up to you. Like it's a process where you have to sort of take it on. And I think if you can make that process more enjoyable, why not do that? I mean, the truth is, when people don't know something, we feel a bit frightened of the things that we're supposed to know, right? Learning is
Yeah,
scary because
definitely.
the unknown is the stuff we don't. So why not make that easier? Why not make it so that there's softening the edges around, not knowing something, so that you're like, hey, I'd actually like to learn more about that. And you've already given me a heads up. I know who Batman is, for example. So I don't have to feel, dumb or whatever people might say when they don't know something. I already feel like I do know something. And that sort of snowballs into learning more things. I think that's really like a useful way to approach things, as you're saying, regardless of the kind of learning or what specifically a person's doing. The idea of making those connections, I think, is super important.
Right on. I think I know the answer to this, but you may surprise me. Who's your favorite superhero?
Well, I get asked that question a lot. And I don't know, maybe you do know this, but my favorite superhero is not what you would predict based on the kinds of books I've written,
Okay.
because the books I've written have typically been, your human-based superheroes like Batman, who
Hmm.
trains, it's training to become, superhuman. Iron Man, where you had, and Batgirl was also another book that was related to that, same idea as Batman. Iron Man, where we use technology, right, to amplify human ability. And then we got Captain America, where we do some genetic engineering and a bunch of other changes to the human body. But it's all humans. My favorite superhero is actually Thor, whose backstory in the MCU, it got morphed into kind of super advanced civilization using the Arthur C. Clarke idea, the famous science fiction writer who said, any advanced, really advanced scientific, society, what you would see given where we're at would be you wouldn't be able to tell magic from advanced science. And so the MCU's done that angle. But when Thor was originally pitched in the comics, it wasn't really pitched like that. It was pitched like literally, Asgard as the mythological thing from, Norse mythology and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know exactly what it was about Thor. I found that kind of cool. I really liked his hammer. Like I liked Mjolnir, and I liked the idea that, first of all, you could like smash stuff up with it, and you could do all these kind of cool things. But when I was a kid, I was fascinated by the idea that he could like swing it and just like fly, right? You could fly behind this thing. I don't know why that captured just whatever, but it stuck with me over the years. And I have a super soft spot for Thor, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense from the perspective of I couldn't really write a book about becoming a mythological, god, because you can't just do that. But we could talk about, becoming those other superheroes. So Thor, it tends to surprise a lot of people actually when I say that. So I don't know if that's the one you had me pegged or not, but
No, no, I did not have you pegged for a Thor guy, but I
yeah,
respect that you are a Thor guy. I think that's awesome.
yeah,
Because Thor's great.
yeah,
And like I like Thor too. I do like the mythological aspect of it. But in the MCU world, he is closer to Superman to me.
yeah,
So I also like Thor in that respect too. Um,
yeah, because he's like invulnerable and basically does a lot of the same kinds of
right,
things. Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That's fair. I never really thought of it like that, but that's actually quite true. Yeah, yeah,
So you did write Becoming Batman though, and Batman is human.
yeah.
So how can a person, and I mean I know it's in the book, but can a person become like Batman? Is that realistic?
Yeah. So one of the main things about the mythology of Batman is all the things that are part of that character, right? There's just so many skills and abilities and so on. So when you look at it like that, it's pretty impossible to imagine being able to do all of what we see Bruce Wayne be able to do, in terms of the science and the even the entrepreneurial stuff and all the philanthropy, putting
He's
that aside.
everything.
Yeah, everything. And that's not even talking about the main thing of Batman, being Batman and hand-to-hand fighting and weapons fighting and driving cars and being a NASCAR driver and being a motorcycle driver and being an acrobat, like
And
all
never
this,
sleeping at all. Never
and
sleep.
never something at all. Yeah, exactly. Um, but what I think, so, which is why I titled the book "The Possibility of a Superhero," right? Not the probability, but rather the possibility, because you can't really do all of that. But that's actually not the point either, I don't think. I think the main point is there are chunks of what Batman represents and who Batman represents and the skills and abilities that Batman represents. There's big chunks of that that you can do. And that would to reach those heights would require like a lot of factors, including genetics and a whole bunch of things and some fluky life events and whatnot. But again, that's probably not the point either, really, that I was hoping to get across, because even if any of it is possible, what it does, hopefully, and what I've hoped it does for some people, and I know from some readers who've connected with me that it has for some folks, it already tells you you can do more than you can already thought you could do. because I've said there is some of this stuff that's true. There's parts of this. You don't have to think of the whole character that you're actually going to do all the things. It doesn't matter. It means you can do more than you're doing now. And that the limits you think you have are in fact not true. There are all kinds of abilities to exceed those limitations that we perceive. And I think a superhero like Batman, when you explore parts of it and you say, okay, this particular piece, you could get these skills in martial arts, or you could do this particular training to do this, or whatever it is, says, okay, that's actually kind of useful to know, because it allows me, where I was thinking here, it allows me to go over here now, or here, or here, or here, with my expectations, or, what I'm going to try and push myself to do. And the fact that some of it's true allows for that sort of line of thinking. So yeah, I think that's the more important um, part of it, that people can realize, you know, even if you're not literally going to become Batman or Batwoman or whatever, um, everybody has a bit of Batman in them. And the point is to find that bit that's relevant to whatever they're trying to do, and then put it to use, right? To pursue those objectives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the golden nugget in that is what you said is you can do more than you're doing now. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of interesting that a fictional character can actually help influence those kinds of things. That people can look at that character like Batman, and that can be inspirational in real life, even though the character is a fictional character.
I totally
And
get it.
and yeah, and I think that's why it's important to use those kinds of ideas in that context, because it resonates with people in a different way, than maybe a real life person that they might try to achieve their things might resonate or not.
No, I totally get it. Like, and I mean, I'm the guy that, I mean, I know a lot as superhero fans. A lot of superhero fans hate Superman because he's too perfect. But that's why I love him, because like it gives me, like, for me, it's something to reach for. Like, even I mean, because part of his, I mean, yeah, he's perfect, but he still has to make decisions, and he still has to balance his strength with the way he wants to be in the world. So, but no, I totally, like, it gives you something that inspires you to maybe reach for more, or to try harder.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the name of the study, but there was an actual study I remember reading, where in a bunch of the different sort of psychology fields, folks have tried to look at the influences of superheroes and how they do things like meal choices at school. In elementary school, if they say Batman would have carrots or Spider-Man would do this, then kids are more likely to make those choices because they resonate with the superheroes. But there was one study where they were trying to use a similar idea about um, empowering people to think about achieving different things and what they could do in these kids. And they used real life athletes, like some NBA athletes and NFL people that were really well known, like people. It wasn't Tom Brady, but that kind of thing, where you'd say, oh, people know who that person is, in the same way that you might say Batman and they would know who that is. Anyway, the point of all this work was that they use superheroes and they use athletes, and they actually found better uptake trying to use superheroes, and which at one point seemed kind of counterintuitive, right? Because wouldn't it make more sense to resonate with, I've seen an actual human doing this? But one of the things that came out of it was people were saying, well, perhaps it's because people do know that there's a real athlete like that, and recognize just how extraordinary that actually is, and know the likelihood of them doing it again is pretty darn small. That person is excellent. There's not generational talent. Nobody's going to do that again right away. But because the fictional character can apply to everybody, it exists somehow outside of the rules of, no, you can't do that because there's already a Batman, or you can't do that because there's already a this or a Spider-Man or whatever. And somehow the fictional character then had more impact. And I think that's really important as a thing to think about, because a lot of time, of course, when people are trying to do different things, it's endorsements from real people, right?
Right.
And I just wonder sometimes if, especially in like health promotion and all kinds of things like physical activity and nutrition and stuff like that, where we're always, hearing all kinds of messaging for kids in schools and be active and all this stuff. I don't know, maybe it would be useful to explore that more with some of those superheroes and whatnot, rather than with, oh, this Olympic athlete does this or this person does that. Maybe there's something in there that should be explored. Hasn't really been, as far as I'm aware.
I look forward to the research you do on that. So you have a huge background in martial arts. How and it, how important for somebody that wants to be Batman or that wants to express their full human potential? Are martial arts essential for that, or do they play a key role in that? Like, where do they come in?
Yeah, I think that martial arts are kind of like the original cross training activities, right? Like in the sense of whole body activities that involve um, a variety of different kinds of fitness, from like flexibility to strength to endurance to psychological aspects to philosophical bits. It's kind of like all around training, depending on how you do it. And it's also a skill, right? So I think for the Batman angle, and why, of course, in my book Becoming Batman, I focused a lot on the martial arts piece as kind of the main kind of skill application I explored. That was because it's my interest as well, and I thought I could speak to, with a bit more authenticity, some of the kinds of things a person would train in martial arts, because I've done a bunch of it myself. But I think martial arts represents a good example of a kind of skill and ability that Batman would train in. Because when we think of Batman, usually, even though it's like, being able to do parkour type things and free running and driving his car and all the little toys and stuff, people are mostly thinking about the fighting ability of Batman a lot of the time. And I think, the road to get there is through those different martial arts exposures. And I kind of like the idea of that as a tool as well, for other people to think about being able to connect with, because martial arts had such an influence in my own life, and I got to really study them deeply over the years, and realize there's a lot of stuff in there that can really apply to a lot of things, but so can other things, right? I think the key part here, where martial arts, putting aside for a minute the kind of self-defense or fighting kind of capacity, but where martial arts really can be so useful in developing, the fictional character of Batman, or just influencing in a positive way just regular folks in their lives, is the focus on the how. It's not just the outcome, it's how you get there that is critical in martial arts. It's more about the journey than the end point. And I think that that's useful just for anybody when they're thinking about how to conduct their lives, because too much of what we get in messaging in our society is about the end point. You need to look like this, you need to get here, you need to buy this, you need to do this, you need to be this, you need to, like this, rather than, okay, fair. I mean, you should look ahead and see where you're going, for sure. I'm not saying, just blindly go all over the place. Have an objective, but how you get to that objective is just as important as when you actually achieve it. And martial arts has that as a kind of a core part of its being, right? Of traditional martial arts anyways. Yeah.
That's awesome. Can martial arts play a role in brain health?
Yeah, again, because when we think about so I'm stumbling around here because I'm trying to figure out how to frame the best way to answer this. One of the most important things to realize, I think, is that people are animals. And what I mean by that is that we've got, fancy, cerebral cortex and all the stuff we think about, where we've got all our cognition, the frontal cortex, all these sort of later evolutionary adaptations that are part of what make, primates and make humans sort of primary in the primates in terms of our abilities. But underneath all that, we're animals. And it's important to realize that animals are built to move. and interact in the environment. And part of that movement is all about sensory feedback that comes from the moving itself, not just the movements, but the actual kind of experience of moving. And the more kind of different sort of experiences you can have, those all we know strongly affect connections in the brain. And all aspects of the brain, when it's around movement, it's got a very, very broad spectrum effect on many, many different parts of the whole cerebrum and the things beneath, like the basal ganglia and your cerebellum at the back of your skull. Your brain and your spinal cord, your entire nervous system is engaged when you're doing movements. And especially when there's skill associated with the movements as well. And that the activities involve big muscles, small muscles, fine motor control, gross motor control. And the more you can do that, the more that one way I've tried to describe this for different purposes, it's sort of like the rake through the Zen garden, where you're pulling things and you're sort of tidying stuff up and sort of smoothing things out and getting back to some kind of nicely organized thing. Well, movement does that to your brain and helps sort of establish the connections you want and to try and strengthen things that are useful. And because of the nature of martial arts on hitting on so many different kinds of basic properties of being an animal moving around, like balance and postural control and quick actions and small actions and integrated whole body things where you really are moving like from your fist to your foot or vice versa. And those kinds of activities are great for establishing and maintaining connections in the nervous system. I mean, it's not a coincidence that those cultures where we might see deep knowledge of martial arts having been foundational. So I'm thinking, for example, China and Japan and Okinawa and so on, and other cultures as well, Indonesia, Thailand, but especially China, where people were practicing martial arts. And wow, what a shock. All these older people that were super old and were still in good condition and quite sharp and could do all kinds of things. It just so happened that they were also doing martial arts for most of their lives and all these different, it's not a coincidence that these sort of activities help maintain your body and brain. And of course, having said everything I said, if you did other activities that included all those different kinds of things, of course, those would be useful as well. I just think that one of the things I like about martial arts dovetails with what we were talking about earlier, which is sneaking the spinach in with the ice cream from the science communication angle. If you give people a martial arts practice, or they're training in some tradition, or they're doing some kind of whatever it is, forms or applications or whatever they're doing, they're focused on that, but there's all this stuff underneath, balance control, muscle strength, reflex, activity, sensory feedback, but they're not doing it like nobody's doing like a punch and going, oh boy, I sure have a lot of extra sensory feedback from the plantar cutaneous mechanoreceptors in the forefoot of my left foot, right?
Thankfully, no.
Yeah, exactly, right? But that's happening, but they're not thinking about it. And yet it will still do the good things it's supposed to do, those signals. So I just think that martial arts, when practiced a certain way, can be really useful as just a package, to do all that stuff. And it's because of what's contained in the package, really, that's the issue. There are, as people always say, many ways up the mountain. But that's one that I think has existed for a long time and clearly has benefits. Yeah.
Awesome. That was great. Almost done with you, but I want to ask you one more thing. On your bio page on your website, you have this one little sentence at the end where you say, I continue my learning daily. And I thought that was great. So how important is continual learning for longevity and the resiliency of a person?
Yeah, well, I think it's super important to always be trying to study things more deeply and do more. And by do more, I don't necessarily mean that you're trying to do a whole bunch of like always exceeding your boundaries by a ton of everything, but rather every day try to get better at what it is that you do, including just being yourself, right? That every day there's going to be stuff where we could think about even just from a behavioral perspective, oh, I wish I wouldn't have reacted like that, when this happened, or, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that, or these kind of things, is to the next day, learn more, try again, same kind of situation you're in, do a different outcome, like have a different outcome, react differently. Like that's the learning. Or if it's, my own perspective, I think it's critical for me to do my own, learning, whether it's more academic kind of learning or body brain learning in martial arts practice. So that's the first thing I do every morning, is I do my hour to an hour and a half of just solo training first thing in the morning. That becomes my way of trying to refine myself and trying to always keep either refreshing, things, so that I'm not forgetting stuff. Because if you study enough things for a long enough period of time, you acquire a lot of different, patterns and stuff you're trying to remember, but also looking for connections. And that kind of learning, I think, is critical, about trying to understand how things relate to each other, and how we can start to think of ourselves in a different way than we used to, through that constant effort of learning, and look for connections and try to appreciate how they affect other things. I mean, in my own case, I started off doing Japanese karate, and then I eventually added Okinawan weapons, and I switched to an Okinawan karate system. And then I started doing, this is like 3 years ago, more recently, Chinese martial arts. So I started doing Baguazhang, which is one of the internal martial arts, and then Wing Chun about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
Trying to learn different things, because I realized at one point that for the longest time, and like I said, I've been doing martial arts for almost 40 years. So I've done it for a significant amount of time. But I was doing things in my training where I was like, I'm doing this training in this tradition, that and it's good stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then this tradition. And eventually I realized, once I started doing more and more different things, that there were so many convergent points where things overlapped, a giant Venn diagram of movement patterns and all kinds of stuff, and began to realize that I'm not really trying to practice all these martial arts. The martial arts are practicing me. So when I go to do the things, it's that all these different things are changing who I am as a martial artist and as a person. These are just the methodologies to do that. And I think that that's a critical thing that I only arrived at as a kind of understanding because of daily learning, right? The idea that always pushing for more, and trying to think about the fact that doing research in a laboratory is learning new things, but doing research in how your body can do stuff when you do your daily training of whatever it is that you do is also a kind of research. And that is the same thing as learning, right? It's
Yes.
They all go together. It's a big kind of yin yang, idea of change, change and sustainability. So I guess that's kind of a roundabout way of answering the question you
Ah,
asked, but
that's
yeah,
perfect. I like it.
yeah.
No, thank you for that. Last question. Well, kind of. Do you like peanut butter?
I do like peanut butter, in fact. Yeah.
Crunchy or creamy?
I'm a crunchy person, but my girls are creamy peanut butter folks. So I've had to make some concessions to that over the years, but I definitely prefer crunchy peanut butter. Yeah, it's funny. That was something my brother always, he just loved peanut butter. And I think I mentioned my brother and my sister earlier. I mean, they're 9 and 12 years older than me, so they're quite influential on me when I was a kid. And they liked certain things, and I did too. But yeah, I definitely like peanut butter for sure.
Oh, peanut butter is definitely, it's a superfood that fuels super bodies. To me, I love it.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite brand?
Um, I like Jif peanut butter, actually. Yeah, Jif Crunchy is my favorite, but yeah.
We're buddies.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. But I wouldn't turn down almost any kind of peanut butter, but
I'm with you.
I
I
could
take
choose
it all,
whatever
but
I
I
could.
love some Jif.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dr. Zehr, where can people continue to learn from you and find out more about you? Your articles, your blogs, your books?
I guess still writing books, so I don't have anything coming out right away, but I do maintain a pretty regular presence at Psychology Today at my Black Belt Brain blog. And if folks, it's linked through my webpage at zehr.ca if they want to go there and try to look for stuff. Um, and I don't do a lot of stuff on social media, but I am on Twitter where I have a bunch of random things that I'll tend to post every now and then. They're welcome to check that out as well if they're interested. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome. It was really nice speaking with you, Tim.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Now get outside and play.